Vengeance Most Fowl is the newest installment in the Wallace and Gromit series, and whether you're brand new to these fun stop-motion movies or have been there since the beginning, it's sure to get you ready to explore this world to the fullest. With that said, grab some cheese and crackers, a drink from your iconic Gromit Mug trademark, and let's get to ranking every major Wallace and Gromit character from good to evil.
All we have to do is sit back and let the machines take the strain.
Like usual, we'll begin with the most pure-hearted characters and work our way down. These characters are the good. The gold medal of good goes to the top dog himself, Gromit. Few animated dogs, if any, have embodied the notion of man's best friend as faithfully as good old Gromit. While Gromit completely lacks in words, he more than makes up for in actions. He's loyal, helpful, and compassionate, always there to help Wallace in any way he's asked to, whether it's making his breakfast every morning, helping him with his sometimes impulsive inventions, or even saving his life from various villains. Wallace can always count on Gromit, and considering how unappreciated he is by the former most of the time, that's even more impressive. The worst we could say about Gromit is the fact that he can occasionally show jealousy when Wallace's inventions, house guests, dates, etc. become his priority over Gromit himself.
And if you think that's progress, wait till you see the next thing I'm working on.
We can see enough of this trait to give Gromit the Envy Sinner medal, but you have to consider the fact that he does practically everything for Wallace, from helping him cut back on cheese for the sake of his waistline, to kickstarting his morning routine every day. He has a right to expect appreciation, but he never expresses anything beyond a totally reasonable amount of frustration with Wallace's antics, and it never stops him from being a loyal pet through thick and thin, having saved his life on many occasions. You deserve all the head pats you get and then some, Gromit. For our silver medalist of good, we have another animal buddy, Shawn the Sheep. While he technically made his debut as a home invader, this sheep had every right to escape his circumstances. He was taken captive along with numerous other sheep to be harvested for wool by Wendy Ramsbottom and her robot dog Preston, the latter of whom was actually doing way worse stuff that we'll get to much later. Wallace quickly grows attached to Shawn and adopts him as a new member of the family. A sense of generosity Shawn returns by helping to break Gromit out of jail when he's framed by Preston. Shawn is so good-hearted that he got his own spin-off series with old friends and new friends and even a sheepdog. But we digress. The bronze medal of good goes to Lady Tottington, one of Wallace's many love interests. Appearing in Curse of the Were-Rabbit, she's a wealthy woman and an animal lover whose only qualm with the rabbits invading her property is that they're interfering with the upcoming vegetable competition. Totty here is always looking out for animals, refusing to accept Victor's offer to hunt them when there are non-lethal alternatives like antipesto. She even refuses to accept that there's a need to hunt down the were-rabbit until it's absolutely necessary in order for the town to have its vegetable competition, instead convincing the townsfolk to give Wallace and Gromit another chance to catch it. She cares a lot about her community, using her social status to make sure that everyone's having a good time and to do nice stuff in general, even converting her own home into a rabbit sanctuary at the end of the movie.
My home, a safe haven for all things fluffy.
Which actually reminds us of a character we nearly forgot, Hutch. When Wallace comes up with one of his most morally questionable inventions, the mind manipulation omatic, his invention was just to swap his hatred of vegetables with Rabbit's love for them, which admittedly is pretty darn considerate. This would ideally help him fix his own diet and protect the townsfolk's vegetables from certain doom. But a mishap occurs, as it usually does, and just one of the results is a rabbit named Hutch turning into a friendly, cheese-loving British guy with a knack for invention.
Oh, I do like a bit of gorgonzola.
Given that Hutch was the one who fixed the MMOM in the first place when Wallace's mind was too far into its rabbit state, we have to give him credit for playing a huge part in saving Wallace's life. I'm not sure how he's doing on Toddy's land, but hopefully he's enjoying plenty of cheese. Up next, we have a quick mention of the Bako Light Girl's pet dog, Fluffles. Fluffles is... Man, poor Fluffles. She's a sweet dog who constantly seems afraid for her life. Initially, that could just be chalked up to her being tiny and shy, but the revelation that her owner is a mass murderer makes her reluctant attitude more understandable. In the end, she manages to pull out a full-on mech suit to mess Pella up and save Wallace's life, which earns her a lot of hero points. And even if it didn't, we aren't about to call her bad, nor even great, just for having the wrong owner, because Fluffles never showed any ill will of her own. Now let's talk about one of Vengeance Most Foul's new characters, Muker. She's a young woman who just joined the police department under Chief Macintosh and follows his advice to go with her copper's gut faithfully, but not without some much needed adjustments.
The important stuff's not up here, it's down here.
Despite her boss's insistence on closing the case as soon as possible, she refuses to book Wallace until they have the evidence they need to either condemn or exonerate him, which, ignoring how concerning it is that a police chief with 40 years of experience didn't even think about the concept of evidence, it shows that she's both sharp and reasonable. Muker's willing to act on her own when she feels the two are innocent, and while she hasn't caught Feathers McGraw yet, she did manage to prove that he was the real culprit, proving herself worthy of filling her superior's shoes. The worst we could say about her is that she can be a little bit tactless, like casually roasting her boss after she said that she could tell he had quite the copper's gut. All around though, the case against Feathers McGraw is in good hands as long as she's on it. Nearing the lower end of our good category, we have the other half of the main duo himself, Wallace. Wallace is a simple man, a brilliant man, mind you, but also a surprisingly simple one. The man loves cheese, he loves his dog, he loves inventing, and well, those are the main three. Wallace is a very polite man who's always out to help others with his inventions. By Wallace's own admission in Vengeance Most Fowl, he only ever invents things that he believes will be beneficial both to himself and to mankind as a whole, often neglecting to consider whether they could be used for evil. And honestly, that pretty much describes Wallace to a T. This guy doesn't have a malicious bone, nor rather a malicious lump of clay in his body. He genuinely loves helping others and is always making new inventions that serve that purpose. Whatever problems he causes, Wallace will always help to clean them up. And while he sometimes neglects to show Gromit as much appreciation as he deserves, he always comes around at the end of the day. More importantly, he's there when Gromit really needs him, like that false imprisonment in A Close Shave where he helped him bust out before he even knew for sure that he was innocent. Wallace does have some genuine flaws that extend beyond his occasional ignorance though. For one, he relies a little bit too much on his inventions to the point where he barely knows how to function without them. He also does leave Gromit in charge of more responsibility than any admittedly brilliant beagle should be shouldering on his own, often leaving him to finish tough jobs on his own when he's got a new love interest. This may be divisive, but we have to give Wallace the Sloth Center Medal for the fact that he's made inventions to do everything for him short of breathing, and we're sure that even that one isn't far behind. On top of that, he surprisingly earned 2 other Center Medals, the Lust Center Medal for how tunnel vision he gets when there's a woman he likes, and the Gluttony Center Medal for just how crackers he is about cheese. But aside from saying something tactless, like remarking on a fellow baker's murder as a way to draw in more business for himself and Gromit's bakery in a matter of loaf and death,
Looking on the bright side, I suppose it means more business for our sake, Gromit.
or doing something a little thoughtless, like swapping his brainwaves with those of a rabbit, Wallace isn't doing anything outright bad of his own volition. He's just a good guy who brings a lot of trouble with the good he's at least trying to do. Just make sure you lock up your cheese around him. Up next we have the Vicar, Reverend Clement Hedges. He plays a supporting role in Curse of the Were-Rabbit as a local bishop who, like the rest of the town, was excited for the vegetable competition, even asking God himself to help him win.
Let them grow big and strong, under thy loving care.
I guess you could argue that's kind of cheating, but you gotta use whatever connections you got, I guess. Hedges was the first one to discover the were-rabbit after offering him food, thinking that he was a poor, hungry person. He witnessed the beast come out in full force, being so shaken up that he claimed it was sent by God himself to punish the people for their sins. While that kind of fear-mongering is questionable, to say the least, he only meant to protect his people from what he thought was a much greater threat than it actually turned out to be. His heart's definitely in the right place, but someone might want to check on his brain. Closing out the good category is Wendy Ram's Bottom. As a daughter of a deceased inventor, she grows attached to Wallace pretty quickly. Appearing in A Close Shave, she's responsible for stealing a lot of sheep and their wool during a serious wool crisis. While that does sound bad, in her defense, it seems she was being forced to do this by her dog. That'll make a lot of sense later, I promise. What's more, there are definitely worse things that she could be doing, and she did draw the line at using those sheep as meat for Preston's dog food business, which nearly earned her the same fate. And she was only saved thanks to Wallace, Gromit, and Shawn's collective bravery. Wendy doesn't have a lot of bad characteristics, but since she has the fewest heroic deeds out of the fully good guys, we can't place her any higher, especially since she doesn't even like cheese. That's it for the good guys, though. Now it's time to talk about the more questionable characters. This is the gray area. First up, let's talk about Wallace's greatest invention, Norbot. This helpful gnome quickly became a neighborhood phenomenon in Vengeance Most Fowl as a singing, dancing gnome who would do any job, big or small, for the right price. This helps Wallace make enough money to pay his bills, and he does it all with a smile on his face.
I told you we'd find a way to pay the bills, lad.
We would place Norbot at the top, since this version of him is very much a pure good character character, but we have to bear in mind that he's a robot. As such, his programming can be altered if the person altering it is smart enough. So when Feathers McGraw got his proverbial flippers on him, Norbot went from a helping hand to the creator of an army of mechanical criminal masterminds. Their goodness or evilness depends entirely on someone else's will for them, so we have to place them right near the middle. Up next, we have now retired police chief Albert Macintosh. Chief Mac first appeared in Curse of the Were-Rabbit, but he gets more time to shine in Vengeance Most Fowl. Unfortunately for him, this isn't a favorable turn of events for his moral compass. We're giving Macintosh the Darwin Center Medal because, for a character with 40 years of police experience, the fact that he didn't initially realize that placing Wallace under arrest would require evidence is absolutely wild. He's gotten reckless in his older years too, insisting on getting Wallace behind bars despite not only lacking evidence that he's behind the recent string of burglaries, but knowing the guy personally for his hand in taking down Feathers McGraw, which he took way more credit for than he actually deserved, earning him an additional Pride Center Medal. As stubborn as he is, though, Macintosh is willing to admit when he's wrong. Despite Mukherjee leaving him behind in pursuit of Feathers, he congratulates her on a job well done, exonerates Wallace of any wrongdoing, and spends his retirement chasing after those dang kids in their steroid-fueled speedboats. And closing out the gray area, we couldn't leave out Cooker, the robot on the moon, in Wallace and Gromit's first adventure, A Grand Day Out. As weirdly ominous as this guy might seem at first, he's actually totally harmless. Well, okay, maybe not harmless, but he isn't too harmful. He's not exactly welcoming since he was ready to introduce himself to Wallace and Gromit by hitting them with a club, but he didn't actually want to hurt them. On the contrary, the guy just wanted to go skiing, and after clinging to the duo's rocket to go home with them didn't work, he was luckily left with 2 metal pieces he could use as makeshift skis to achieve his dream. Some say Cooker is still up there skiing his heart out to this day. Others say he probably skied for like 10 minutes before he realized he was out of coins. We prefer to believe the former though. Either way, he at least got to achieve his dreams of going downhill. These last few characters are falling even further downhill, for different reasons. They are the bad to evil. The least evil villain in the series has to be Victor's pet dog, Philip. While we'd be hesitant to call this dog evil in the traditional sense, given that he's, a dog, the fact is that he willingly assists Victor in all of his various nefarious schemes.
All we have to do now is wait for our fluffy friend to appear.
You could argue that he doesn't know any better, sure, but if Gromit is any indication, dogs in this universe are weirdly smart, and given the fact that Philip is able to repurpose a carnival ride car into a working miniature plane, we think it's safe to say he knows more or less what he's doing. That said, while he will go after his master's enemies with violence if necessary, he's also surprisingly considerate. When the plane Gromit and Philip are fighting on stops, suddenly, both of them pause the battle until one of them finds a coin to get it going again, with Philip being the one who actually has one. It's really not much, sure, but it's definitely the most selfless thing any of these guys have done, considering how Philip could have easily taken Gromit out if he'd just been a little more ruthless. Just outside of our top 3 is the infamous Victor Quatermain, Philip's owner and the main villain of Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Much more than just a pansy, Victor is a liar, a gold digger, and a straight-up would-be murderer.
I'm sorry, Companula, but I am what I am.
He earns the Greed Sinner Medal easily for his determination to con Lady Tottington out of her fortune, threatening Wallace and jumping straight into fighting him for threatening his ultimate goal. When he discovers Wallace is the Were-Rabbit, he proves that he's fully willing to murder people to get what he wants, convincing the townsfolk that he's the only one standing between them and death by Were-Rabbit. Victor is a sleazebag any way you slice it, but he gets worse when he accidentally exposes malice to Totty through his slip of the tongue, revealing how long he'd known that the Were-Rabbit was actually Wallace, and how determined he still was to kill him. That's not even mentioning the fact that he apparently enjoys torturing rabbits, which, come on, man, that's just vile. Despite all that, though, he does seem to be a somewhat decent pet owner. We don't see why Philip would stick with him otherwise, so that keeps him off the podium of evil. For our Bronze Medal of Evil, we have Preston from A Close Shave. We teased this metal mutt's depravity earlier, so it's finally time to dive into what made him so despicable. Although he was built by Wendeline's father to protect her after he was gone, Preston betrayed his former master by forcing his new master to run around kidnapping sheep during an already severe wool crisis. He did this not just to keep the wool shop running, but to use the sheep as meat for his own brand of dog food, and to make matters worse, he was willing to frame his fellow dog Gromit for the whole ordeal. But he does get a taste of his own medicine when he falls into his own meat grinder, or I guess that would be metal grinder in this case, and is rebuilt into a friendly dog much more like his old self again. So they lobotomized him? Well, let's move on before we think about that too long. Preston's reformed, that's what counts. But first, this video is brought to you by Wicked Binge channel memberships. You can gain access to our videos early before anyone else, plus gain access to members-only emojis and loyalty badges by supporting the channel through a membership. But now it's time to talk about a villain who very much isn't. His cold, dead eyes tell you everything you need to know about his ruthless villainy. He is the infamous Feathers McGraw. Feathers is the most iconic villain in the Wallace and Gromit saga by far. Initially introduced as a house guest whose worst attribute was trying to take Gromit's place in the household, Feathers had a much darker side to him than he let on. This penguin is a wanted jewel thief who disguised himself as a chicken to pull off various heists, and by gaining Wallace's trust, he came up with a plan to hijack his new robotic trousers to control him, sort of like Plankton in that classic episode of SpongeBob, except instead of a burger recipe, it was a straight up diamond. Even when he was foiled by Wallace and Gromit, just before he was taken into custody by the zoo, Feathers managed to swap out the diamond with a turnip and hide the diamond in Wallace and Gromit's own home, waiting for years for just the right moment to take his titular vengeance, Most Fowl. The perfect opportunity came when Wallace created Norbot, which Feathers hacked into and transformed into the leader of an army of robo-soldiers that would do his bidding. That kind of dedication is as impressive as it is evil, and it's still nowhere near the full extent of his malice. On top of how determined he is to steal priceless artifacts and how willing he is to let others take the fall for it, this penguin has absolutely killed before. Like, seriously, Feathers just had that gun on him the whole time and thought nothing about pointing it at Gromit. He also drowns one of his own Norbot soldiers in Vengeance Most Fowl and nearly kills Gromit twice. At one point, he seemed to agree to help Gromit from falling off of a bridge in exchange for giving him the diamond. But when Gromit relented, Feathers went back on his end of the bargain without a second thought and left Gromit to presumably die. And he would have too if it weren't for the intervention of the Norbots. Thankfully, Gromit saw even this coming and pulled out the exact same trick Feathers played on the world at large. Enjoy your turnip, Feathers, you slick son of a gun, you. The only good trait this guy has is the fact that he does seem to care about his temporary baby seal before leaving the zoo. You can't be all bad if you're at least nice to cute fuzzy animals, right? But that's only one of the reasons that while Feathers is definitely the most entertaining villain of the bunch, he's outdone in terms of evil by the light girl, Paella Blackwell. Paella was Wallace's dream girl for years thanks to her memorable commercials as the Bako Light Girl, and a stroke of luck leads to him saving her from a near-fatal bike accident. As a result, the pair fall in love and eventually become engaged, but not before Gromit discovers some unsavory truths about her. Some sleuthing around her room reveals that Paella is the infamous baker serial killer, whose plan was to seduce a total of 13 bakers, murder them, and collect their pictures and uniforms to put on display as her baker's dozen. In other words, Paella is a straight-up mass murderer, and she'll go to any lengths to keep her identity a secret. She burns her own book as evidence when Gromit brings it to Wallace in an effort to expose her, falsely accuses him of biting her to get him punished, and ultimately attempts to directly kill Wallace, him only being saved by the combined efforts of Gromit and her own dog, Fluffles, who she's implied to be both physically and verbally abusive towards. As if all of that weren't bad enough, we haven't even gotten to the reason she does all these horrible crimes. As we mentioned before, Paella is, or was rather, the Bako Light Girl. She rode on hot air balloons as she advertised her bread. That was until she put on a bit too much weight to safely ride the balloon, which led to her losing her title. Mind you, everything else in her life seemed to be going fine. She'd no doubt made enough money to never have to lift a finger again. She had a nice house with a dog and enough charm to make genuine connections with people despite her body image struggles, but all of that wasn't enough to distract her from her visceral hatred of bakers everywhere, which ran so deep that she decided the only way to satisfy her rage was to systematically murder 13 different men in gruesome calculated ways so that nobody would trace it back to her. For doing some of the worst things on this list out of anyone, for some of the pettiest reasons, we find her to be an easy pick for the most evil character in Wallace and Gromit history, not to mention winner of the Wrath Center Medal. Heck, Paella even broke the don't feed the crocodiles rule in her final moments. What a degenerate!